Welcome to the ASITII Festival of Space. Thanks for joining us today for the Investing in Space panel. I want to start off by doing an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, My Security Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. So yeah, welcome to the ASITII Festival of Space. We're coming to the end of our third week of sessions. Hopefully you've had a chance to check some of them out, but if you haven't yet, they are all getting recorded and they're available on the asitii.space website. We've had a whole range of different speakers, and yeah, next week will be our last full week of sessions, and then our final session will be on the 29th of November. That's going to be a panel with UWA. So a huge thank you to all of our sponsors. Our platinum sponsor, Inmarsat, thank you so much. Our Women in Space sponsor, Lockheed Martin, our gold sponsor, Fugro Spark, and our official media partner, media channel, Space and Defense. So today we're doing investing in space. So can I ask all of the panelists to please join me on screen and turn on their cameras. So today I am joined by Mike Kalms, who's the Defence and Space Industry Lead Partner at KPMG. We've got Rebecca Shrimpton, who's the Head of Defence Infrastructure and Space at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade. We've got Tim Parsons, who's the Executive Chair, SmartSat Aurora Space Cluster. Bill Bartee, who's the co-founder at Main Sequence Ventures, and our awesome moderator today is Carroll, who's the director at Evolve 3. So before I hand over to Stephen, I will just say, please feel free to use the chat function. Let us know where you're listening in from today, and there's also that Q&A function there. So we'd love to invite you all to ask as many questions as possible. So without further ado, Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess. Welcome, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure. The only chance I'm going to get to be on a panel with people like these amazing people, is to be the moderator. So thanks to CD to give me that absolute pleasure. And the introductions there and the titles of our panel speaks for itself. And I guess if we were all together physically, we'd be giving ASITI a massive round of applause. And obviously the My Security media team for putting this together. A month of space awesomeness is something special. And I guess the bonus of making it online, so we can all sort of jump in and record it and catch up with it. So hopefully all of us are comfortable with that recording, because you never know what we say. You go, oh, did I say that really? But we're going to say awesome things. There's no doubt about that. You guys are superstars. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And just to the people out there in the real world that are on the chat and on the Q&A, I will do my best to keep an eye on your comments. So please put them up there, and I will try to keep an eye on them and bring in some of those as well, because obviously you in the future, bad luck, but you watching it right now, fabulous, and we'll bring your questions in where we can. So I'll get out of the way. And what I want to do is, instead of me introducing our guests, I would love each of our guests to basically give themselves a little introduction. That way you get to focus your introduction however you want, because you've all got amazing backgrounds and stories and histories and where you're currently at. But if you could just each introduce yourselves and also give us a little bit of why space for you guys, personally, professionally. What is it that sort of draws you into this amazing industry? And it's probably the most exciting, well, I guess we're all biased here, the most exciting industry you can be involved in. And so why are you involved in it? But yeah, if I just work around the group here, I've got Rebecca up in the top corner for me. So Rebecca, hello. Yeah, can you introduce yourself and give us a bit of why space for you?
Oh, hello, Steve, and thank you so much, ASITI, for this great opportunity. I'm very excited to be here. As you know, I'm Beck. I go by Beck generally, so please feel free to use that. And I am the head of defence. I tend to put defence, space and infrastructure. Sometimes my organisation puts it the other way around, but for me, defence and space are so overlapping and so just inherently integrated that you can't really talk about a space really without talking about defence, which is hopefully something I might get to talk about a little bit later. I do come from about 18 years in the Department of Defence, a couple of years with Foreign Affairs and Trade. But my most recent experience before coming into Austrade was as a Senior Advisor Major Powers to Australia's Foreign Minister, where I did indeed cover space, as you'd expect if I'm covering a country like the US and doing things like Five Eyes and China. Look, what excites me about space? You know, what doesn't excite me about space is probably a quicker question. But look, I think we've got a chance to really get this right from the start in this new space era. And I know that's a term that's bandied around a little bit, but this era that we're in at the moment and the opportunity that we have at the moment is really quite different. And it's for good reason, again, that I'd like to get into in more detail later. But, you know, for me, the key thing about this is that it's not about exploiting space. It's about preserving, accessing, sustaining, using space for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of the Earth. And similarly, as we get more sophisticated and we get the ability to take more and more things into space, it's about taking those really great technologies that we are creating on Earth, and almost entire industries we can imagine in the future that we currently do on Earth may actually happen in space. We may see manufacturing in space, we may see mining in space. You know, the opportunity, the key word for me is opportunity. So what I think, you know, the most exciting thing here is the chance to share that and have more people understand that, to address that perception that space is for either highly technical, really scientifically minded people or for billionaires, and there's no in between. Space is for everybody, and space is for good. So the opportunity to share that story and to share that message and to share the why of those two claims is really important to me. And from an Australian perspective, wow, do we have some opportunities here. We are just beautifully situated to make an awesome contribution to the global space economy, to the global space industry, and space gives us an opportunity to hit not only our economic and national security objectives, but it just touches on the ability to increase productivity in our agricultural sector, in our mining sector. I mean, it really does have so many applications. And again, I just don't think we've fully grasped or fully appreciated that yet. So that's what excites me, and that's where the opportunity is for me.
That's a great intro, Beck. Thank you so much. I don't think you guys are probably awesome, but I don't think you've done a better intro than that for us. That you've nailed so many great topics to kick us off. But going clockwise around the room, Bill, I've got you next. Can you give us a little intro and see if you can keep up with Beck there?
Yeah, well, it's a hard act to follow, I can tell you. Very tough. No, thanks for this. So I'm Bill. I'm one of the general partners at Made Sequence Ventures. We're an investor in lots of deep tech things, including space and space-related companies. So we're an investor in Gilmore, in Mariota, SmartSat, something called Q-Control, and our big supporters in this particular area. My personal story is that I'm originally from the US, and I fortunately grew up in an area. I grew up about 40 kilometers south of a place called Wallops Island, Virginia. And for space nerds who know what that is, that's kind of the second NASA launch site. So as a kid, you know, we always saw these weather satellites going up, you know, which had rockets had CIA on the side, but no one ever said that. So we would see these launches all the time, and it was really odd growing up there because I thought that was the way the world worked. So when I moved away from there, I was like, where's the rockets? But we also, so I got infected very early on, and also grew up under the Apollo program. And even earlier than that, the town that I grew up in had these, I remember as a kid hearing these rumors, and I was always a little bit of a math nerd in middle school. And I remember hearing these rumors that there was this group of women that were doing all these calculations for NASA. And it so happens that if you've seen the movie or read the book Hidden Figures, so this was a group of Black women who literally grew up probably about 10 miles or 14 kilometers from where I grew up. And we always knew about these people and about these ladies, but never met them, unfortunately. But what an inspiration. So, my story is about being interested, started from a personal one of just being physically close to a lot of this stuff, having a lot of my friends who became NASA engineers and things like that, and just being awed by the universe in general. So hence the beginnings or the genesis of interest in space and all things related. So that's me.
That is cool, mate. And you've got it in your DNA there. You're sort of you're fortunate enough to like you said, have been at that's the epicenter of some amazing historic, space industry issues and opportunities. So thank you for that. And it's our pleasure to have you here. Moving around, Tim, you're next on my hit list here. Can you give us the same as well, please? So what DNA do you have?
Hi, Stephen. So really nice to meet you and be here with such an auspicious group. I'm here in my capacity as chair of Aurora, which is a space cluster. SmartSat spun out this subsidiary company to really create connections between different space startup companies from different SMEs, in fact, businesses and government organizations anywhere, to support kind of the building of a ladder so that the companies can climb in technical readiness level, investment readiness level, commercial readiness level. Because that's one of the unique things about deep tech companies. Space companies are a little bit like biotech companies, especially upstream ones. They can't really go straight to their customers. They need partners to be able to test stuff, develop stuff, and qualify them so they can get business and win contracts. And we also feel, it's pretty unique in Australia. I think it's not that arguable to say that Australia has the amazing ecosystem it has now because of startups. And, if I may be so bold, because of the trust that folks like Bill placed in people like Gilmore early on to invest in those companies well before the curve of everybody else, and sort of really create a lot of these conditions. So we've got this kind of, startup led almost ecosystem, and now all of the other players are learning how to create this village. So I'm sort of doing my part to help create this village. It takes a village to raise a child, right? It creates a village to build a space company. And we're also, as Beck alluded to, we're in a unique era where instead of giant government programs where everything is done secretly and quietly, it's now being unbundled. Right? The government is turning into a buyer, a procurer of services from lots of different folks. And that's where the commercial opportunities arise, both upstream in space itself and of course downstream in solving problems like climate change, like sustainability, like where's the water go, etc. Personal story, of course I always wanted to be an astronaut as a kid. I was one of those kids that hid behind the couch when Doctor Who was on. I was somebody who actually was living in the UK at the time, and I saw the first Star Wars movie in Leicester Square. Blew my mind. And then I had the joy of meeting Charlie Duke, who was commander of one of the, I think it was one of the last missions. And he was such a real person, and yet he told such an incredible story. And it sort of infected me, and so that was it. I just had to, become an aerospace engineer, and so I went on that kind of epic journey. And now I'm very lucky, through a lot of different other industries and other things I've done. I'm very lucky now that I'm segueing back into space as it becomes one of the major high tech industries here in Australia. How's that, Stephen?
Mate, that's gold. Thank you so much. That's wicked. And I think we obviously, probably a lot of us related to two of your comments there, hiding behind the couch with Doctor Who. I know I did that more than once myself. And I vividly remember when I first watched Star Wars. I guess, they are two moments in life where you go, oh, okay, I'm in the right room at the moment. That's wicked. Thank you, Tim. But you touch on a lot of the comments and conversations we want to flow through here. Thank you for that. And so there's a lot of, like you said, sort of joining of dots coming through the industry. So we'll catch up with you in a second. Mike, please continue us on. Who are you? Where is space in your life?
Hey, thanks, Steve. And great to be here with Tim, Bill, and Beck. Lovely to see you all again. I hope I'm as excited as Beck is. I think this is a wonderful moment in time for humanity, and it's wonderful to be part of it. Just building on the comments that others have said, I think that the fascinating piece for us today perhaps is the tensions. I think we're talking about them, but the tensions between the various aspects of space and how we go about it. This tension between defence and civil that I think Jim talked about, between private equity and public capital that Bill's probably navigating. I think there's a very interesting national corporate thing going on as well, which I think we could probably talk about, and maybe this sort of communal and contested idea that I think I've talked about previously. How do we balance these things? How do we work through this in a unique way, quite frankly, for space? It won't be as we did it in the 60s. It won't be like the age of discovery when we all, when certain nations left Europe to discover the world, but there will be very interesting macro and micro tensions between the interests of these nation states and corporations and the safety considerations of people that are out there doing it. I think there's some really wonderful conversations that we can have across those tensions, Steve, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. You're exactly right. We could be here for weeks just going through some of these commercial, moral, ethical opportunity. The conversation is amazing because of you guys. Obviously, where you come from and your experiences. We are very lucky to have you. I'll tie those together then. So, as you said, Mike, and as Beck opened with, one of the comments Beck there was humanity, and we're here discussing investing in space, and you talked about those conflicts, possibly, that tension between commercial and an outcome-driven humanity benefits, the conflict of a startup, so as Tim says, and Bill's involved, obviously, versus government and its role. So can we take a little step into that, or at a higher level with regards to what do you guys define as the space industry, or Australia's version, if you like, of the space industry? I know it's a big question, but and defense, like you said, Rebecca, at the very beginning there, it's hard to remove things like defense from space industry. So can we just have a little, so we'll start with you then, Beck. Why? So why do we have to combine those two things, and how do you define the space industry, and particularly in your role? What is part of space?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer could in fact be different for different people. But part of our job here is to try and get some consensus and some unity of thought around this. Look, for me, space is inherently global. It's inherently international, and so when we think about the Australian space industry, we should not be thinking of it as a discrete sort of system that tries to duplicate and produce, the full suite of space capabilities kind of from tooth to tail. I think that would be a mistake. We are too small. We don't have the resources, and we don't have the market demand to be doing things like that. So for me, the integration of the civil, commercial and defence lenses on space is really, really important, because we have to think about how we can bring these capabilities to bear in all of those sectors. So we have to stop thinking of, defence space, civil space and commercial space, and think about space capabilities themselves and what they offer, all three of those sectors. Look, we do tend to think of the industry as, that set of space activities that happen along the space value chain. But look, as I've said, for us, it's about not suffering from something that I call task saturation that'll be familiar to military people, and particularly to pilots. But I think given that we've got limited resources, given that we have some extremely good world-leading capabilities, we need to talk to our competitive and natural advantages, those that have been invested in and nurtured by the system, and then really help them grow. And the best way that we can possibly do that is to, we're talking about DNA. What we want to do is make sure that the Australian space industry DNA is outward looking, and that we're not just building a cottage Australian space industry, but we're building a global space industry in Australia. Now that really needs the work of an organisation like my own to make sure that there are export opportunities so that companies can scale and grow and integrate into global supply chains. And it means we need to attract really good, productive, quality investment. And that matters because what we don't want to do is displace the excellence in our own system. We don't need or want to have absolutely everything. We need to prioritise, we need to be selective, and we need to try and bring the right investors, the right models for investment, and connect them to those key parts where we have real strengths and a real contribution to make into that global picture.
Fabulous, well said, thank you. And that you're a superstar at this. You've done this once or twice, because you've given me the perfect lead into to Bill, with particularly from that perspective. Well, on all those perspectives. Bill, one of the questions I was going to have is, as a venture capitalist, as an investor in tech, in startups, or whatever that looks like, you're looking for scale, and you're looking for how does that business make a commercial impact, obviously. And spaces could be very niche. So like Beck said there, if you treat it just as defense or just as civil or whatever, is that not scalable enough for you? So can you have a bit of chat to us about, again, how you look at space as an investor, and particularly, obviously, you're looking for scale. So how does that work for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and one we have top of mind all the time. And I agree with Beck. I mean, we're not interested in things that work only in Australia. We're interested in global opportunities. And I think sometimes it's often either not connected or not said enough, but to me, advancements in space equals advancements on Earth. And I think it's important for people to sort of keep that equation in mind, and it forms part of our kind of investment thesis. And just to talk about the country and then answer your question specifically a little bit, I mean, there's a lot of great things that in Australia that other countries don't have. First of all, we're longitudinally lucky. Second of all, the CSIRO is the largest partner with NASA in the Southern Hemisphere. They've got huge radio telescope network that has played a key part in almost everything. So that's true. And there's some really first-class thinkers here. So if you can sort of combine all of that information and all of that capability and form some ideas where, as Beck said, we don't want to duplicate what everybody else is doing, because why would you? So what are the unique sort of capabilities that Australia can offer so that people will actually come here to get things done instead of us going there? We want to be a net producer of things, not a net consumer. So when we look at stuff, we're looking for a range of characteristics, and maybe an example would help to illustrate this. When we looked at Gilmore, for instance, this is not a commercial for them, so apologize for that. But one of the things that we liked about Adam in particular was that he was building a rocket company, and you'd say, okay, there's 50 of them out there. What are you doing? But one of the things we liked about him was he wanted to build a rocket company where the motor itself was made of a very few number of parts. So a very simple motor that could push a rocket into orbit. That's what his goal was. And we thought, right, so if he can actually do that, and most rocket engines have 10,000 plus parts, the simpler the better. And there will be a capability that he can have here where, with the oncoming onslaught of satellites that need to be put up, he could win part of that business. So we thought the simplicity of his design, the ability to have it here in the Southern Hemisphere where we got some longitudinal advantages, we thought that was a capability that would be very hard to duplicate globally. And we thought that's a unique capability. So they're on their way to do that. And so what we try to look for in all of these things is we try to look for capabilities that are unique to not only to commercial partners and business partners, but also to the defense departments as well. Because, for somebody like Gilmore, I mean, he can push up satellites no matter who they're owned by, right? So he's building a capability that's global in nature, has a unique solution for it. And we think it's going to be competitive, so we're pretty excited about that. And when you say, when I started off by saying that advancements in space equals advancements on Earth. I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's an interesting company in the U.S. now called methanesat.org, and all these cats do is they put satellites up that measure methane, and most people may not. I mean, some people may not understand that methane is like 80 times. Has the 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide. So be kind of good to know where that stuff's coming from and see if you can put a lid on it. And that's just one practical example. So we kind of look for things and capabilities like that where there's a uniqueness here that everybody can come to.
That's so well put, mate. Thank you. And it comes back to that humanity part as well. You know, that ties it back to, you know, improving the world and the where we live. And back to Earth, I'm in Western Australia, I'm in Perth. You know, SKA, we're very lucky to have the SKA here. And and again, you know, big data. So, you know, the volumes of data. And so that's obviously for the SKA, but the impact on the normal world, that solving that and dealing with that is going to have.
Hey, Steve, just one thing about that. I have to tell this quick story. It'll only take me 20 seconds, but about 6 or 8 years ago, I was on the top of Mauna Kea, where they have a bunch of the, you know, they have probably 11 of the best observatories in the world, and all the astronomers up there could do was talk about the SKA.
Yeah, we are very, very lucky.
And so,
and it's a game. Well, it's a game changer for so many reasons, like you said. So space impacts Earth, and technology leads the way. Tim, can we jump across and because of that, the combination there, and as a CRC, and as you said, you're bringing together industry and you're bringing together different, you know, participants and those sorts of things, and that impact. So, you know, going to space, but then the collaboration potentially from working on in the space project, but also then the challenges of that. So can you sort of give us some of your thoughts on, and you sort of opened with that, which was great, how combining the supply chain and the startups and corporates and government, you know, how well that goes, and your definitions of where that fits for the space race or the space industry.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a wide-ranging question, but I'll try and take a slice through it, Stephen.
Choose the bit you want.
No, and I'm inspired a little bit by Mike's kind of perspective as well. You know, there are a lot of interesting tensions to resolve. So one of the things about space is very much like Australian society, it's highly intersectional, right? Space sort of integrates, it's a systems discipline, it integrates so many different areas: legal, data, technical, hardware, operations, you know, people, medicine, it's food, right? It's extraordinary how many areas it touches. And of course, it's also critical infrastructure. You know, everybody on this conference, I'm sure, has one of these smartphones, which is probably being chroma keyed out in their hand, which is basically a little satellite. Yeah, except it's a satellite with touchscreen and stereo speakers, but it's pretty much everything else. It's a little satellite. So we've all got a bit of space. And in fact, our society is completely dependent on satellite technology now. The UK government recently made an estimate. If they lost access just to positioning technology, it would cost them £1 billion a day in lost value in the economy, let alone all the lives that would be lost, you know, all the things that would go wrong. Forget about food delivery, you know, but, you know, more importantly, emergency services. So, so actually space is imbricated into everyday life. Now, SmartSat CRC, what the organization is focused on is, okay, well, we actually have some amazing research capabilities. We have research capabilities that extend from, you know, the ground all the way up into deep space. 6 square kilometer array is in Australia. You know, there's no surprise because of the depths of talent that's also in this country across all those different regimes. So I think that kind of intersectional piece means that we have to actually be careful what we do. So SmartSat's chosen 3 areas to focus on. One is next generation spacecraft systems, which encompasses things like AI, cybersecurity. You know, how do you even, you know, transform how satellite buses are designed? And in there, emerging themes have been things like, okay, how do we turn, you know, satellites into Lego bricks? You know, why is everything so bespoke? It's kind of dumb. And that is a trend that's accelerating with the small satellite revolution, which is all about mega constellations. Right? We've had about 1/3 of the spacecraft ever launched in the history of humanity being launched in the last 18 months. And over the next decade, we're expecting to see at least 50,000 small mass-produced satellites launched for all these mega constellations. So, so that's the sort of that's the backdrop, and we're interested in saying, okay, well, how does applied research, because that's what a CRC is about, how do we take some of these ideas and actually get them out of the university into the hands of industry to help them do things faster, cheaper, smarter, better. Another area, of course, is next generation Earth observation services, and there's one of the major programs there is AquaWatch, which is being done in partnership with folks like CSIRO, and that is looking at, okay, well, turns out there's not that many instruments that are focused on freshwater. freshwater lakes, freshwater rivers, and how do you manage all that? And then it also turns out that Australia, driest continent, we actually don't understand how fresh water runs through all of our different systems. So therefore policy levers are broken or not working, or sources of huge contention. So I think that these areas, you know, are an aspect of space that I think is quite fascinating, is how much it is about an operating system for the Earth, and not just also an incredible vantage point to look down on the Earth and out at the universe philosophically. So for me, the space industry is actually got very blurry boundaries. You know, it's got a big feather, if you want to use Adobe Photoshop terminology, where it kind of bleeds into lots and lots of realms. And of course, and so it's very integrative, and that makes it challenging. It is born global. And I think that's another aspect. You know, Bill mentioned a number of our national, you know, advantages. We're also responsible for 1/7 of the Earth's surface from emissions, from a search and rescue point of view. We, because of Trans-Pacific and Trans-Indian, North-South Asia air traffic, Air Services Australia touches about 30% of the world's air traffic in a non-COVID period. So we're hugely influential, right? And then finally, perhaps our biggest superpower, you know, people want to have Aussies in their parties. So, you know, we can get into lots of places around the world. We recently did a call under the auspices of the UK-Australia Space Bridge for folks to pitch in, you know, proposals. And, you know, I'll be honest, we were kind of running out of time, and we had to get this money spent and a whole bunch of stuff. So we didn't really give them that much time. I think they had about 4 weeks. And in 4 weeks, we had 40 teams comprising Australian and UK organizations stand up in 4 weeks, right? 40. So our ability to do that, I think we've only just started scratching the surface. And that's where, as I think as an Australian ecosystem, we can actually lead some of these things where we say, okay, here's a really big problem. It's a problem for folks all around the world. How might we solve this? Hey, look, there's some money, let's do that. And then as Australians, people are like, okay, well, we'll play. So that's, I think, one of the things that we can also leverage to help our companies and our people and our kids and so forth extend their reach thanks to space. What do you reckon?
That is awesome, mate. I'll have to do more space stuff so I get invited to more parties. Mike, you get invited to lots of parties. Why do you get invited to lots of parties, and what are you doing at these parties? So why do you, what is the definition for you at the party of space? How do you play?
I'd like to think it's because I'm a good dancer, Steve, but I suspect that's not true.
I think it might be all of us. There you go.
I mean, I love some of the comments. We've all got a bit of space on us, as Tim said, and I think that's, he used the feather analogy. For me, it's sort of an onion ring. At the centre, there are things that are unambiguously space industry, maybe it's launch or people developing nano satellites, but at the edge is Foxtel and me with my mobile phone. And the broader we take, the picture we take, the larger the aperture, I think the more excited we can be about how space is changing our lives. But as Bill said, the commercial part of space is trying to do things which are good for the community, good for humanity, but also, his words, useful to defence. And that's hard, because defence isn't a very good. Defence needs to learn to be a better buyer of the sorts of services and products and solutions that these startup and scale-up space businesses in Australia are creating. It's not that Defence doesn't want to buy them, or federal government doesn't want to buy them. It's just that they're not typically used to working with those sorts of businesses, that entrepreneurial class with private capital, in the way that that's looking for certain behaviours from the owners. And so Defence needs to change and to grow and to become better at that. And I think it is. Don't get me wrong. The sovereign plans that it's produced, there's all sorts of good intent out there, but there's still some that word again, tensions between the billions of dollars Australia's going to spend on space through the defence sector and how we get these really great businesses close to it. And of course, then there's the obvious kind of problem that I'm sure Tim has worried about these last couple of weeks, and it's people shooting, as happened this week, shooting satellites out of the sky, the night sky. And of course, if we're putting as many satellites up as Tim has suggested, and he's spot on, it's not helpful. It's not at all helpful to be creating tens of thousands of items out there that are very difficult to track and which are dangerous and damaging to the sorts of constellations that commercial industry is putting out there. These things, I think, will be hard for us to predict in terms of how they reconcile, but that's what we're going to have to do over the coming decades.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you all. Let's just go for a moment to how do businesses learn about startups, existing businesses, wherever you are on that spectrum? How do they get involved in, like, to learn more about the supply chains of space, the opportunities in the space industry? As we said, it goes everywhere. How do we get more people to the party? More Australian businesses engaged in the space industry? Where do they go? Where do they hang out? What do they do? What are your suggestions on that and to make them connected better as well, so they're not just sitting on their own on the outside doing something? They're coming in to hang out with the others that they might be able to support each other with. So can you help us out with suggestions on how you get into the space party, or where the best parties are? Mike, maybe your party man, go for it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that we lack for channels in the sense that there isn't federal, state, private money to help an individual with a good idea or a group with a good idea to take that forward and to mature it. I'd love to hear what Bill and Tim's thoughts are on that. It does feel like, with the various state-based platforms, geographies, I'd be surprised, I guess, if there were good ideas that were struggling to find support. But maybe your point, Steve, is more around how do we connect them together and collaborate more effectively. And I think that probably is an area of focus where we could be again better at pulling government closer to industry and enabling acceleration. But I don't know, Bill, Tim, are there problems for people with good ideas to move ahead in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is tricky. I mean, yes, you've got R&D tax, which is incredibly useful. You have got MVP grants in different states. You've got a lot of things, but I think it's also tricky to sort of understand where the commercial opportunities are, because it's not obvious. Like if you've got an internet business or you've got some other business, you can get to customers and understand what their problems are. In space, well, how do you really have a chance to chat to defense about what their problems are if you're not from defense? We've had companies that have had to, propose, for example, this company, Heo Robotics, which I'm very happy to be representing, and I'm an investor in there. They started out as an asteroid mining company, as a company that was going to be a prospector for asteroids, because they were passionate about it, and they also just happened to be incredibly badass orbital mechanics guys, right? And robotics folks who had PhDs in that area. And it took them about 2 years and going to lots of international conferences and talking to a lot of everybody. And luckily they had a learner mindset to understand that there was a huge opportunity in space inspection, and that they could take some of their ideas of how they might take photographs of near Earth orbit crossing asteroids and actually take photographs of satellites and other valuable infrastructure from space. What their amazing breakthrough, though, was realizing that they could borrow other people's cameras. The realization that the utilization rate of cameras in space is about 0.1%. And so they could actually credibly get access to other people's infrastructure. So I think those kinds of hacks, those kinds of startup hacks, the challenge in space is that you just need so much more runway.
Well, and that's awesome. And there's a couple of points there, just to segue that across to Bill. Finding the problem to solve for space. So I've got I'm passionate, I'm excited, I know I'm good at this area, but yeah, who cares? What's the problem you're solving? So, part of that community of going, okay, these are the real problems in the space industry. But then also that longevity to market. So Bill, from your perspective, I guess community, bringing them together, finding the problems, and then obviously the lead time. How does this work for you? What's your comments around that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I think, Mike said it best. He would be surprised if there are companies who have good ideas, and the term is good, he'd be surprised if they were having a problem getting funding. And I think he's largely right. But, that said, look, space is a little more challenging than, a general software business. As Tim said, the time frames are longer. sometimes there is not as much clarity. But again, it all comes back down to, you know, the issue that's being solved. And I think, you know, Tim's illustration of Theo is a good one. You know, and that was a really interesting point that I didn't understand, is that they figured out how to use existing infrastructure to solve another problem. And so what you have is, the fortunate thing is, you know, we have all kinds of falling costs. I mean, everybody knows it costs a lot less to put up things into space per kilo than it used to. And you have all this falling costs, and that's just opening the doors to entrepreneurs. I also agree that I think, you know, one area that could be helpful is if governments and defense learn to be better buyers and learn to be a little more trustworthy in some cases of startups. You know, one of the reasons that space companies used to be so bloody expensive is because they were putting humans up, and so you had to have 48, you know, systems that were backup systems. Now it does, you know, if you're not putting up a human, the systems can be, I won't say less robust, but let's put it this way: they don't have to have as many backup systems, which means it can cost less. There, you know, and you know what, the irony of a lot of this is that if we want to build an industry here, we actually have to support them. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, you know, there's a startup over here. They're only 2 or 3 years old, made up of a bunch of smart cats who have PhDs and all kinds of great things, and they got a great solution. And we have a prime over here, and we can buy the same thing. So what should we do? You know, it's the old axiom. Well, let's just buy from the safe place. Well, that's not how you're going to build an industry. You know, you're gonna, you know, there's a case for that, of course, but we also got to back the local people who want to, the local men and women who want to found these companies, and that's how we build an industry here. And you know, it's the old axiom: once you get the flywheel turning, you're going to have a few successful companies. They're going to spin out do some more successful things. So I think money is harder. Fortunately, there's people like us and others out there who are longer-term investors who take the long view and are supportive of this industry. We have limits, but what I do see is more capital coming into the market for these kinds of things.
That's fantastic. That's great. Thank you. And yeah, capital in the market and longevity. And I think, as Tim said, compared it to biotech at the beginning there, which is such a good comparison. So thank you. Beck, so on the community aspect and understanding and sharing and collaborating, we've got the challenges, which is across all industries, whether it's space or whoever that wants to, for example, sell to defence. How do you see businesses that can leverage each other more and either join a community, a group, or whatever, or you know, is that a challenge, or is it something that's relatively easy for a startup or anybody to get involved in?
I think it's a really interesting and it's a really important question. And I think at this point, it's really important to recognise that the industry in this country is quite nascent. It's, you know, it's quite immature, and it still is quite segmented. And that's not for, you know, a change in the conversation. And I do want to acknowledge that, you know, we are talking more and more across those civil, commercial, defence divides that I talked to before, that are real barriers to us achieving the efficiencies and getting the capabilities we need across the board. So some of those conversations are happening, but it's hard for an organisation like Defence to understand the role of private investment and private capital, and to really grasp the implications of what we are seeing in the inversion from, you know, old space to new space, of government driven, government funded, to commercially driven, commercially funded. I think even globally, I would describe where we're at again, you know, as this hybrid state where we still really do need government to be something of an anchor customer, certainly in this country. And there's a role for government to play, certainly, in bringing its own demand and its own requirement and leveraging its own procurement and purchasing power to help the industry, and to set requirements, to break down some of those barriers in how, you know, those who have requirements talk to industry. There are a lot of layers for industry to get through to try and have a conversation with the buyer, right? Especially if that's a government buyer. So I think you know, that's a really important thing to notice. But the other thing I think is important and good and positive is that, look, we've got relative strengths to play to within those civil, commercial, government sectors, right? And Mike mentioned before this ASITI, this terrible event this week. We've got governments beavering away in places like the UN, trying to establish rules and norms. And that is so important. That is so important precisely for what we saw today. We need to be able to share really good data on exactly what's happening in space. So we need to increase transparency, reduce the ability and the maneuverability for bad actors. And if they do stuff, we need to be able to show them. And you know, shout out to Leo Labs this week for, you know, the great job they did of very quickly getting out to the public some idea of, you know, just how dreadful this incident was. And I'm, you know, I'm not going to you know, pointing fingers specifically here. But as our governments are, you know, working in that space and working together and worrying about some of those problems, you know, commercial industry is getting on with the job of solving some of those problems directly. We have, you know, market-leading excitement around debris removal, around improving commercial space domain awareness, space situational awareness. That term's used a bit differently in different communities, but you know, they're just getting on with it, and that is just extremely important, because what it does is offer options, and for an organisation like Defence, who can't afford to fail, right? And you know, there are good reasons why Defence goes for demonstrated, proven capabilities, because the consequences of failing in a defence operation are huge. But guess where that's driving Defence? To commercial solutions, for redundancy, for resilience, for complicating target sets, for, you know, for a whole lot of reasons. And the other wonderful thing I want to talk about, because I do like to be positive and optimistic, is that actually it's often in the big companies and the private sector where they're leading on environmental and social license issues, right? So they take this stuff seriously. As well. So we're seeing a convergence of interests between, you know, government, private sector and civil, and our own people, and what they want, expect and demand of all of us as actors in the space economy. And I think that's really nice. There's a lot of work to be done to integrate and bring the community together. And as and Austrade as an organisation that sort of speaks to investors all the time, what they want to see is a community. They don't want to have to deal with, you know, 16, 17, 20, 1,000 different actors. They really would love to see our space industry, our space ecosystem support each other, support itself, come together and look like some kind of coherent entity, you know, for an investor to engage with. So it is really important for us, and it's hard because we have this federated model of federal government and state government to try and take some of the competition out of it. You've got, you know, there are good commercial reasons for being highly competitive, but if we can sort of, you know, at least evolve a level of cooperation and collaboration within the community itself, I think that's a platform from which everyone can benefit. Everyone.
100. I think everyone was nodding vigorously with you there, Beck. Collaboration wins, and I know we've got CRC. Doesn't know, no one knows it better than the CRC. And right, and you know, the rising tide lifts all boats. So if we all work in an area where we can collaborate, bring our, like you said, limited resources into a few focused areas. Mike's whacked his hand up. I think Mike wants to do some asteroid mining. Yeah, and go for it, Mike. And I'm mindful, unfortunately, of time. Time sucks. Can we go to wait for us to go back in time a little bit and have a little bit more time to talk? Yeah, Mike, jump in there. And there's also a question.
Yeah, I was just going to build on. I mean, Bill and Beck spoke about it. You know, if we're going to create this industry, we've got to back it. I think, Bill, you said we've got to back it. And we do have some evidence of Australia's ability to back it through the defence industry, so the content programs of the last 25 years, Beck, that you would recall. And I think there's kind of two enduring lessons from that. One is that the successful businesses aren't just reliant on government money. In the space context, they would be successful and have international exporting businesses that were well regarded. And secondly, and perhaps the hardest thing, is they've got an enduring and courageous sponsor in government. An enduring and courageous sponsor, and that's kind of hard to find at the moment, I would argue. It's not an easy individual who feels that they can be courageous around backing a winner, or at least a cluster of winners, and doing that over a period of time, which, Tim, you know, is necessary to be, you know, it takes time. That's the bit that I think is hardest for us at the moment, and if I worry, that's the risk, is that we don't have that setting quite right yet. But otherwise, you know, it's all there to play for. We just need, perhaps people on this call need to be part of the crew that start to help government to get more courageous and around some of these space investments that we see. I don't know, Bill or Tim or Beck, if you think differently.
No, I agree. I mean, and if you talk about, I mean, Beck brought up Leo Labs. Leo Labs is a private company out of California. One of the key members there is Ed Lu. Ed was a former astronaut who was a space shuttle captain, also went up on the rocket, the Russian rocket. So, you know, here's a company that's got a unique capability. They got a radar installation here. I'm not an investor, but I like what they're doing. You know, here's an example of, they can track they have unique data sets and unique ability to track. And, you know, there are governments around the world who do buy services from them. So that's one example. Another example, frankly, is that if you look at SpaceX, I mean, if you wind back a clock 15 years or so when they started, you know, here's a guy who was in a payment system who started rocket business. You know, I mean, how crazy does that sound, right? Fortunately, he was able to get the backing of the federal government in the United States. And if you now look at where the company is, you know, arguably they're the most successful launch company ever, or on their way to being there. And it was a combination of entrepreneurial spirit plus the federal government getting behind in partnership and helping them early on. And I think some of those initiatives need to take place with some of these newer companies, and then we'll get there. Then we'll have a SpaceX, or we'll have an equivalent in an industry. But it does take, you know, it takes private and public capital and a commitment to make sure it gets done. That's how we build it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that combination, like you said, you're bringing the entrepreneurial spirit, the government connection, the financial backing, and a long-term plan. Not looking for the quick win that you get with a mining investment or whatever that might be. Yep, no, we're playing a long game here. I want to throw to the quick question from the audience. Robert, had a question regarding: is there an engagement? So, does anybody know if there is any engagement with tertiary education groups to funnel career pathways into the space industry in Australia? So do we want to have a little look at that? Because that's a great question in that, what does that mean? It's funneling into the space industry. Does that mean funding people to AI that then work in space? Is it, any comments from the panel there about the tertiary education going into the space industry?
Organizations like SmartSat CRC and others, we fund, you know, I think up to 75 PhDs, for example. So certainly folks that are coming through that have an interest in going down a particular rabbit hole or somewhere that there's some high impact bit of IP that could be discovered, we fund that. And that's sort of directly relevant to space. And then I wouldn't be surprised if there are many hundreds more that are tangentially, whether they're in IoT, AI, cybersecurity, or even things like, you know, plant physiology, you know, characterizing land use, sustainability, carbon sequestration, etc. So there's a whole range of areas. One of the areas that Australia is very strong in particular, is calibration validation of Earth observation imagery. So we have huge capability in geoscience in Australia and in CSIRO and a number of our universities. The challenge, I think, is probably not the academic pathways. There's plenty of those. The challenge is then, how do you turn that into a commercial opportunity with global competitive advantage? And I think that's where, in some of these cases, I think that's where maybe public-private partnerships are required. And that's a new beast that we haven't quite, you know, wrapped our head around. But yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give. Australia has no trouble funding stuff in the academic space. It's how do we get it out of that world and put it up to higher TRLs and get it out into the economy.
Yeah, and that's a common Australian issue, isn't it? We've got great research, great, you know, patent lodgements and everything that goes with papers. Do we commercialise enough of it? I'd put one slant on what
Tim said. He said for people who want to go down the rabbit hole, but since we're talking space, maybe it should be wormhole. And then the only other thing I would say is, look, there's phenomenal PhD aerospace engineering courses here at the university system, and one of them who, one person who went through that obviously is that is of some note lately is Chris Balshausen, who went up in the Bezos rock. I mean, I think he's an alumni of yours, isn't he, Tim? Maybe. Did you guys go to the same school? I don't remember, but seriously, there's seriously good tertiary education here in all areas that anybody might have an interest in.
Now, again, go for it, Beck. Yes, please do.
Add one comment to that. Look, I really agree. We've got exceptional talent in this country, but I can't remember who told me this figure yesterday, but someone said to me, despite that, we're not translating that into people getting into space jobs. I think 1 in 10 space engineers in this country is Australian. Just say that again, 1 in 10. That was a figure thrown at me yesterday. I'll have to check it. I cannot put my hand on my heart, but that's a shocking figure, but it talks to the systemic problem, right? That we need to think about this really holistically, from how we get, primary school kids, senior school kids, better and more interested. And then we get we've got wonderful universities doing wonderful stuff. How do we then get their graduates into our industry, well employed, really contributing? And then you talk about the financing ecosystem or the industry support ecosystem. And here's where we need to get from, a bit of an addiction with grants, throwing grants around, to starting to look at really innovative acquisition and procurement systems where you have prototype contracts that lead to program type contracts. So you're bringing a company or a set of companies up a ladder all the time, and there's a path, and that path ends actually, not just at the end of an innovation program contract, which is still going to be kind of small, but in a program of record, that's American language, but in a government program for defense, for CSIRO, for BOM, for GA, for the ASA, for whoever, forging that pathway is a job that we all need to really focus on, because I think that's where we're still not quite delivering.
And just to pick up on what Beck said, the best capital a startup can ever raise is customer revenue.
Yeah, customer money. So unfortunately, people, let's look at the time. Can you please each give us, and I'm going to give you 20 seconds each, get to the title, Investing in Space. Why should we be in space? And Beck, you threw out the why in your initial thing. Why should we, as in either government, personal, private, whatever it is, why should we be investing in space? You got about 20 seconds each. Who wants to go?
Because space is the new, if you think about cars in the middle of the century, if you think about semiconductors in the 80s, a lot of parallels being made, but space is a game changer. And if we see the kind of investment and the kind of capabilities and the kind of achievements continue on the trajectory that they are on now, investing in space will be the one thing that you just never look back from. And as a country, we've got to do it. And as a globe, we've got to do it.
Fabulous. Thank you. Come on, who's next? Mike?
The market opportunity, undoubtedly, but I would invest in space because people at KPMG want to. We are desperately interested. It is a purpose, it is a passion point for our younger generation, and we have an obligation to do it.
Fabulous, love it. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, one, it's super interesting, really exciting. There's lots of industry to be built and made, and it's part of our everyday lives. I mean, as Tim said, if we didn't have Google Maps, we wouldn't be able to get around these days. We could go back to those goofy books we all carried in our cars, so the amazing, the industry that's going to come out of the space industry for the benefit of us Earthlings who remain on the planet is enormous.
Fabulous, thank you. And Tim, bring us home, mate. Why should we be investing in space? Come on.
Yeah, all those aspirational narratives are already out there. So look, it's just, let's hard cash ROI. Every dollar that we invest in space, Canada's experience is then leads to anything from $12 to $25 return across the whole society. So I'll be the capitalist here and call that one out.
Well done, mate. You've done it perfectly. It was all about that. You've done it. Thank you. All of you. You've actually brought the love, you brought the power, you've brought this to space. It's been my pleasure to have you here, Jessica. You've got a minute. I think we've done what we're supposed to do.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, guys. So informative and insightful and inspiring. And yeah, as Becky said there, space really is a game changer. And it's so inspiring to think how much it impacts Earth and how much it impacts all of us. So thank you for all of your time. Steve, thank you for your moderation. It was great. I'm going to share my screen quickly with some final slides and then we'll end the show. All right. Yeah, huge thank you again to our panelists. We have got Mike Kalms, Defence and Space Industry Lead Partner at KPMG, Rebecca Shrimpton, Head of Defence, Infrastructure and Space, Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Tim Parsons, Executive Chair, SmartSat Aurora Space Cluster, Bill Bartee, Co-Founder of Main Sequence Ventures, and our amazing moderator, Steve Carroll, who is the Director at Evolve 3. So the next session is coming up next week. We've got Manny Thairu on Tuesday. She's going to be joining us from Europe. So it's a slightly later session at 8 p.m. and she's from Amazon Web Services. She'll be talking about cloud-powered space missions. So huge thank you to everyone again. Have an amazing day and yeah, thanks again. Bye. See you.
Bye.